and the king of Og and the king of Bashan. And so he was sent. Already there was a precedent sent here. God said, destroy them all. And of course, there's this situation here in Joshua with Jericho, and I can think of another time with the Amalekites when King Saul was instructed to kill all of the men, women, and children in Amalek, and also, of course, all of the livestock. And you remember the story. He didn't do it. He kept the king alive, and he kept the best of the livestock for quote-unquote sacrifice to the Lord. But the instruction from God was that he was supposed to destroy all of those. And so, as we think about, and I think maybe the struggle is, how does a loving God, and of course the world would look at this and be totally abhorred. And of course there would be many in the world also who would look at this and not understand at all the total biblical picture of what is taking place here. They would look at these commands, for instance, and say, well, how is that any different from what the Muslims are doing today in their jihad? I mean, God instructed this horrible thing for his people to go do, and all they're doing is the same kind of thing. And so how can we justify that? And of course, their idea is that since this is in the Bible, this is what the Bible teaches that Christians ought to do. This is what we believe. That we think we should go around killing people as a means of getting victory for God. Now we know that Christians are not supposed to be having this spirit. In fact, there was an occasion in the New Testament when the disciples thought maybe that they should treat some folks that were opposing them like Elijah would have done. Should we go strike them? And the Lord rebuked them, said that you don't know what spirit you're of. Son of Man has not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. All right? And God is not about destroying lives. He's about saving lives. He's a merciful God. All right? But He is also a God of judgment, and He does have a right to judge. And ultimately, of course, God has a right to do that which He desires to do. And of course, everything He does is always good and right. Yes? Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Right. 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 Yes. No. Right. Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, God used them to do that. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And that's, I do believe, though, that as we think about this, this is the devil's imitation of what the Lord did here. In other words, they can falsely try to find justification for their actions in what the Lord actually instructed here. But as Brother Mike said, the reality is there are some similarities in perception, but there are no real similarities in reality. The reality is that what is being done by the Islamists today is a far different thing from what was being done here. And of course, ultimately where we get to is that one of them serves the real God and the other one serves the false God. That's what you come right down to. But in getting to that point, which we're going to get to, in getting to that point, there are other things that make that obvious. All right, you get down, I mean, it's not just a matter of, well, we say that our God is the true God. They say their God is the true God, and they're doing the same thing. So it doesn't, who's right? Well, there are ways that we can look at and see and I think there are some apparent similarities, and that's what I want us to look at to start out with, and then we're going to look at the obvious differences that took place between the two as we go along. So, and any similarities between these two are only apparent similarities, and they're not real. They're only surface things that really, I mean, yes, were people killed by the Israelis? Yes. Is this a real happening? Or is this just a fantastic fable that we believe, that God never really instructed people to really do this, but these are fairy tales in the Old Testament? That's what some people believe. Well, that's just a fairy tale. God would never have really instructed people to do that. That's you spiritualize it all away, you make it a fairy tale so that the creation account becomes a fairy tale, and just a good story to show us how we have been made by God, but in 6 days. Come on. In reality, God instructing people to kill everybody in a city, that didn't really happen. Well, did it happen? The answer is, it did happen. It really happened. All right, God's Word says it. We believe literally that it did happen. And so in that sense, on the surface, you could look at it and say, okay, some of these things look similar. How about when you look at the similarities between ancient Israel's conquests and the jihad movement of today? Both are claimed to be done in obedience to God. All right? Both are being claimed to be done at the direction of God. Obviously not the same God. The Muslims don't believe in our one true God. But they would say that they're doing it in obedience to their God. And the Israelites, of course, did it in obedience to their God. What if the Israelites had gone out and God hadn't directed them, and they just decided, I don't like that city over there, and so we're going to go destroy every man, woman, and child in it? What would that have been called? Murder. That would have been called murder. They would have been murderers at that point. All right? And so they never did it. The Israelites never did that except when God commanded them to. And so we'll look at that a little bit later on. And I think both are claimed to be done in opposition to those who have committed great wickedness against God. Now, the excuse for the like Brother Mike said, sadly the jihadists are not only killing the infidels; they're killing their own people. They're sending out suicide bombers, even of their own ilk. That they demonstrate a complete lack of respect for life. Honestly, if you were to go in there and to destroy a building, it would create more havoc than if you went in there and destroyed 500 people. I mean, really, there's just not a respect for life. That respect is obviously missing. But they would claim and excuse their behavior based on the fact that they are fighting the wicked infidels, the great Satan, the United States of America, Israel. Now, sadly, the United States of America is giving them food for their fodder. When we behave the way we are, is there anybody that honestly can assess something called homosexual marriage and say that this is a decent and God-fearing people that are doing this? You have to say this is indecent. I got to tell you something. When we're sending our women out to the front lines, that's indecent. That shows not, people accuse believers of not respecting women because we don't let them preach or whatever. I'll tell you who doesn't respect women. That's this movement in our country. There's no respect for the fairer sex. It was always throughout history, it's been obvious and known that it's man's duty to protect their women. That's our responsibility. We've always known that, and that's normal and decent. Even, the barbarians knew that. If you went and paraded what we're doing in front of the barbarians, they would have been appalled by it. Can you imagine having to send your women to war on the front lines? First of all, it wouldn't have even been possible back then, in the days of hand-to-hand combat. I mean, now when all you have to do is pull a trigger in many cases, you can get away with it, but it's still barbaric. It's still ridiculous. But you couldn't even get away with it back then. A society would have been just overrun. They'd tried that. But can you imagine? You got duffers foolishly staying home while they send their women out to do their warring for them. I mean, it's just, that's the place our country has come to. And no wonder it's food for fodder for some of these people who want to be our enemies. They're just looking for an excuse to be our enemies to begin with. They hate Israel. We've supported Israel. That's what this all comes down to. You can boil it all down to that. Israel is one they really hate. I mean, they said they hate Western culture and all the rest of that. Those are just excuses. The rest of it, is fairly obvious. And so their excuse is that they are fighting the wicked infidels, and they're going to put them down. Well, God instructed Israel to destroy these folks. He said the land is going to spew them out because of their wickedness. And so when Israel was killing these folks, they knew that God had instructed them and that God had told them that these were such wicked men that they needed to be purged out of the land. All right, and that was done only at the instruction that the Lord God gave. In Leviticus chapter 18, verses 24 to 30, God speaks of the land causing the sin of those people, causing the land to spew them out, and He told that to Israel way back in Leviticus. And they knew that about these people that they would be fighting. So when God instructed them that way, it wasn't just a thing where they decided who was wicked and who wasn't. Israel didn't decide, those are the infidels, those are the wicked ones, and we're the good ones. They never did that. They always had to wait for God's instruction. All right? And so both are claimed to be justified in the killing of men, women, and children who are enemies of God. Now, we would not think of Joshua as a murderer, for instance. Why is Joshua not a murderer? Not any more than we would consider a person who has the horrible job of administering the capital punishment with the electric chair. Think about there's somebody that has to do that. If you have capital punishment, then somebody's got to administer that. It's not a pleasant job, but somebody's got to do it. Those people are not murderers that have to do that. Certainly not a job I would want, but somebody's got to do it if we're going to have justice in that way. And so, you don't call those people murderers. They are doing what's necessary and what is actually good and right in that situation, even though it's a dastardly thing. Sometimes the good and right thing is not a pleasant thing. And Joshua and his men knew that, and they went around and they did that which God told them to do. Those are some of the obvious external similarities, but the similarities are not real. The similarities are not are just on the surface, and so I have several things listed here, if I can get through them in the time that we have left, of what differentiates those two things. What makes the conquest of Jericho and the times when God instructed Israel to destroy men, women, and children and animals and all the rest different from what the jihadists are doing today? Number one, Israel's conquests were always clear military campaigns, whereas jihadists of today use exclusively, almost exclusively anyway, campaigns of terror. They are going after innocent people who are unarmed. You can't say that the people of Jericho were unarmed. You can't say they weren't warned. Was this a surprise attack that Israel made? Well, in one sense it was. I don't think that the people of Jericho ever expected their wall was coming down. But Israel was making a very clear statement as they walked around those walls 6 days and walked around them 7 times on the 7th day that, hey, we're here to claim this city. At any time. Those people could, if they would have thought for a moment, why didn't they go out there and start doing some hand-to-hand combat with some people marching around some walls? They had the opportunity. They were armed, but they trusted in their walls. They didn't think that Israel could ever get them inside of there. And of course, had they gone out and done that, they would have been defeated too. God would have gotten the victory either way, but they were not unarmed people or innocent people who were not made aware of the situation. There was a clear battle that was enjoined, and God got the victory over them clearly as they fought that battle. There was no terrorism, going out there and surprising innocent people, unarmed people. None of these things that when God did this, did he instruct the children of Israel to go and kill unarmed people in that way. Never did he do that. These were armed people. They were military people. Obviously, the whole city, men, women, and children were not all military people, but there was a warfare going on that these people understood, and so there's a difference in how the jihadists are exercising their quote unquote victory. If their God is so strong, why can't he defeat somebody in a straight up military conflict? Which, by the way, rarely ever happens. When these people line up against Israel, for instance, they lose almost every time. And their God is so big, why do they have to go kill innocent people? Why can't they just say, here we are, our God is big, we're going to attack you and we're going to win? Well, it doesn't work that way because their God is not real. Secondly, Israel's conquests always valued Israeli lives, whereas jihadists do not hesitate to sacrifice their own by acts of suicide or murder or whatever it might be. You remember when after this story in Jericho, God instructed them, now you got to attack Ai. Ai was much smaller than Jericho, and Israel thought, well, we don't need to send everybody. We'll be okay. That's a little town. Look what we just did in Jericho. I mean, they forgot that the power of God was what defeated Jericho, not their own power. And so they went in there. And of course, Achan had taken of the accursed stuff that he wasn't supposed to take. And God said, you're not getting any victory. And they went in there, and I think they lost like 9 soldiers. You know, there was great mourning over the fact that they lost 9 people out of all their host. Every soul that they lost, they cared about. They cared about deeply. There was a respect for life. Certainly a respect for the life of their own people that were God's people. And when that happened, it caused them to really have to, whoa, what's going on? I mean, they didn't just say, well, that's just 9 people, so what? Let's go again the next day. They were actually, this shouldn't be happening. The people of God should not be being defeated like this, even if it means losing only 9 people. And they had to reassess based on that care, that concern they had for their own lives. These jihadists don't care about anybody's life. They really don't even care. Well, I would make that probably they do care about their own, but their own is just a very small group of leaders that they don't even care about the people who are brainwashed into working for them. They'll just very easily send them and blow them up. They don't care about these people. That is not in any way what was happening here in Israel, even in these ancient times when God instructed them to do that. There was nothing like that going on. Thirdly, Israel's conquests were all performed as the immediate command from the mouth of God, whereas jihadists obey an open-ended written command to destroy all infidels. All right, in other words, every time Israel had to do this, they had to wait for the specific instruction from God. These people you must go in and kill. That's your job. I'm commanding you to do that. All right? God never told Israel, just go kill everybody you want to kill. You take this land and you go in and when you attack a city, you defeat and kill everybody in it wherever they are, whenever you want to. They were never free to do that. All right? Whereas these jihadists have it written in their Quran that they are free to kill the infidels. And, of course, their interpretation of that is we can do that anytime, anywhere we want to, whether they're armed, whether they're not armed, whoever they are, whenever they appear, we can do whatever we want to. God never so instructed the Israelites to behave that way, ever. And so that's a huge difference made. And God gave them strict limitations on who could and who could not be killed. There was a respect for life. Even these lives that had to be exterminated were not done so lightly. I'll look back very quickly at Deuteronomy. chapter number 2. If you want to look back there with me, you can. That is, if I can get there somewhat quickly here. There we go. My pages of this Bible are not turning very easily. Chapter 2, starting in verse 1, says, Then we turned and took our journey into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea, as the Lord spake unto me, and we compassed Mount Seir many days. And the Lord spake unto me, saying, Ye have compassed this mountain long enough. Turn you northward, and command thou the people, saying, Ye are to pass through the coast of your brethren, the children of Esau, which dwell in Seir, and they shall be afraid of you. Take ye good heed unto yourselves, therefore. Meddle not with them, for I will not give you of their land, no, not so much as a footbreadth, because I have given that Mount Seir unto Esau for a possession. And he goes on there, but he's putting limitations on them. There were people, he didn't just say go kill every enemy that you have. There were enemies that he said, you can't touch them. I've given them that land. You can't even have anything to do with them. I will not give you a victory over them. You will have to avoid them. All right, and he never gave them an open-ended command to kill every enemy that came in their path. That never was the intention that God had. But it is the way that these jihadists behave themselves, and it certainly is barbaric in every respect. Finally, and this is the next to last one that I have. The last one is actually the first thing that I've already said. But Israel's conquests were affirmed by God as he sent miracles to give victory, whereas the jihadists can cite no such miracles. Here we have, in this instance, we have a very clear statement that this is not the Israelites who were doing this, that this was God who instructed them to do it. When you go into a place and you march around the walls and the walls fall down, that says something. That says this is not a people who are coming in and doing things of their own accord. This is God instructing them to do what they're doing and making a way for them to do it. All right? And so God is the one who very clearly, in many of these instances, affirmed with a miracle that this was his hand. All right? And of course, these jihadists they need no such miracle. As much as a great spectacle of the Twin Towers falling down in New York City it was not a miracle. You fly a plane into a building, it's going to come down. All right, that's not a miracle. And these folks don't rely on miracles. They rely on their wickedness to accomplish what they're doing. And so I had a quote here of this is from Matthew Henry. And of course, Matthew Henry would have written this before all of this modern day jihad stuff was known like it is now. Now, really, this jihad movement that we have today is not new. The Crusades back in the Middle Ages were in response to a very similar uprising by these Mohammedists that have been happening. So this is actually not new. It's new in our age. When we were kids, we didn't really have to deal with this so much. Although if you lived in Israel all that time, you'd still dealt with it all the time. But it's something that even years ago, before all of this was out there like it is now, Matthew Henry observed this. He said, if they had not had a divine warrant under the seal of miracles for this execution, it could not have been justified, nor can it justify the like now, when we are sure, no such warrant can be produced. But being appointed by the righteous judge of heaven and earth to do it, who is not unrighteous in taking vengeance, they are to be applauded in doing it as the faithful ministers of justice. Work for God was then bloody work, and cursed was he that did it deceitfully, keeping back his sword from blood. Talking there, Jeremiah 48, verse 10. But the spirit of the gospel is very different. For Christ came not to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And he cites there Luke chapter 9, verse 56. Christ's victories were of another nature. And so when we talk about today, we're not given permission by the fact that these instances exist in the Old Testament where God commanded his people to do a dirty job. That does not ever give us warrant for not valuing and treasuring the life of any person, no matter who they might be. These are all souls for whom Christ died. Even these Mohammedists, even these jihadists, these are souls for whom Christ died. And of course, they've been deceived. They've been absconded by Satan and blinded by Satan himself. But these are still men and women for whom Christ died. That we, of course, we have no murderous intent toward them, or we should not. We should have only a desire for their salvation, a desire to see them come to Christ as their Savior, and so we're not out there in the spirit of grace, going out there and wanting to kill people or take vengeance against people. That is not the spirit that we are to have, even though. And that was, by the way, not the spirit that Joshua was to have had either. Joshua was doing this in strict obedience to the command of God. He didn't take delight in these killings. This was not personal with Joshua. Joshua and Israel did not know these people. These people, then when they came into the land, it's not like they had dealings with these people and hated them, and there was a personal vendetta against them. It was a strictly obedience on the part of Israel that this was to be conducted. And finally, so that leads us to the last thing, which we've already mentioned, and that is Israel's conquests were given by the one true God, whereas the jihadists were commanded by a false God. And that's the main difference. God would not sanction or behave, never did, the way that these jihadists are doing today. So, do we have anything else that we can bring out? Some other difference, some other similar?